Hello, my name is Sierra Cardenas, and I chose option 2 of the final, which is the comparative lab final project. We'll be looking at these 3 organisms and the reproduction system. And first, I'm going to talk about what reproduction is. So in this first bullet point, I took from a website that is cited at the last slide. The role of reproduction is to provide for the continued existence of a species. It is the process by which living organisms duplicate themselves. So there are 2 types of reproduction that can occur within these 3 organisms. It's sexual reproduction, which according to the book states that reproduction arising from fusion of 2 gametes, which are the sperm and the egg. Asexual reproduction is when the generation of offspring from a single parent that occurs without the fusion of gametes, which means offspring can reproduce from only one parent. Both parents are necessary for this process to take place. So next, we're going to go over sponges, which belongs to the phylum Porifera. So Porifera is quite unique because of its name, which means pore bearing. It's basically describing all the holes that are on the body. So there are about 5,000 species that inhabit the marine environment. And what makes them so interesting is that they don't have any tissue or organs. They have what's called a cellular level organization, which means each cell does its own function. Sponges have a somatic embryogenesis, which means they are capable of reproducing from tiny particles or cells. Sponges are hermaphroditic, which means they produce both the sperm and the egg. However, they do not fertilize their own eggs. What they do is they exchange genetic material with other sponges, creating an increase in their genetic diversity. So in this slide, it basically just elaborates on everything that I have been saying, and I just want to start off from right here and state this, that the sperm are created and concentrated and sent out the excurrent openings, sometimes in masses so dense that the sponges appear to be smoking. These sperms are subsequently captured by female sponges of the same species. Inside the female, the sperm are transported to eggs by special cells called archaeocytes. And a special form of sexual reproduction that I would just like to touch base on is fragmentation. Fragmentation is a form of asexual reproduction that does not require any transfer of genetic information. Basically, this is a process of cloning, and sponges have become quite good at this. Our next slide is going to be Hydra, which belongs to the Cnidaria phylum. Cnidaria have both asexual and sexual reproduction. And when we look at this Hydra right here, this is what is called a bud. And it's right here. This is called the bud. And they grow this out and they're able to break it off and eventually duplicate this out itself. And this process is called budding. And this is how Cnidaria are able to reproduce. So in this following slide, this touch bases on what budding is. And what's interesting is that this is the most common only when the environment is at a warmer climate. And this is when the environment is in their favor. This is when they will reproduce asexually. Asexually, yes. And they will reproduce sexual when the environment isn't quite in their favor. This is when the climate conditions are much colder. And this, it says, here's such factors as changes in temperature, the low rising temperatures, and the lack of sufficient food sources cause the organism to start developing gonads in preparation for sexual reproduction. So that's something that's quite interesting. So here we have the last one, which is going to be the Planarian, and it belongs to phylum Platyhelminthes. It's also referred to as flatworms, And just like Hydra, Planaria are also hermaphroditic. They have both male and female parts. Planarian reproduce both asexual and sexual. And here are some quotes that I took from a website that I found to be quite interesting, is that flatworms are immortal, which means that no matter how tiny you're able to cut them, they will always be able to regenerate and reproduce. And this is how they make their genetic copies, and this is how they keep their species continuing and keep them growing. So here are some comparing and contrasting. I think that it was quite interesting that some of these organisms were hermaphroditic. However, one of them wasn't. So that was quite interesting. And I think what stood out from the rest was it was Planaria, how they're immortal and they'll always be able to regenerate no matter how tiny their pieces may be cut off. I think that is very, very interesting and unique. So in conclusion, I have learned that Hydra and Planaria are both hermaphroditic, while sponges produce both eggs and sperms, but they do not fertilize any eggs. So that's what makes them quite different. And I think this was all a very interesting and very informative a presentation. And thank you for listening.